you know the warning, even if you have never heard the rest. A boy with wings, flying too close to the sun until the wings fail and he falls. For most of us, that is the whole story, a neat little lesson about pride, about not reaching too high. But the boy in the sky had a name, Icarus, and a father flying right beside him, and the older telling is not really a warning at all. It is one of the saddest stories the Greeks ever told, about a brilliant man who was trapped, who built a miracle to set his son free, and who then watched that same miracle take the boy's life right in front of him. So tonight you'll hear the full story of Icarus and his father Daedalus, why they were imprisoned on an island they could not leave, the desperate, impossible escape that one of them designed, and the single warning that a boy, drunk on the joy of flight, forgot to keep. If these are the kinds of stories you want more of, take a moment to subscribe. It genuinely keeps this channel alive, and tell me in the comments which myth you want to hear next. Now, settle in. To understand the fall, we have to begin with the cleverest man in the ancient world and the terrible thing his own brilliance had built. His father was Daedalus, and in the old stories there was no one in the mortal world who could match him. He was an inventor, an architect, a maker of things no one had imagined before, the kind of mind that comes along once in an age. Whatever could be built, Daedalus could build it. Whatever puzzle could be solved, he could solve it, usually in some clever way that no one else had thought of. His genius made him famous across the ancient world, and in time it carried him to the island of Crete, to the court of its powerful king, Minos, the richest and most feared ruler of his day. And there, on Crete, Daedalus took on the greatest and most terrible commission of his life. King Minos had a problem he needed hidden, a monstrous thing, half man and half bull, born into his own family, and too dangerous to be let loose and too shameful to be killed. Minos needed a prison for it, something no creature could ever escape from. So he turned to the cleverest man alive, and Daedalus built him exactly that, a vast maze of winding stone passages, so cunning and so endless that anything placed at its heart would be lost in it forever. They called it the labyrinth. For years, the labyrinth did exactly what it was built to do. The creature at its center, the Minotaur, stayed lost in the dark of the maze, and the people of Crete fed it the way you feed something you are ashamed of and afraid of in equal measure. But then, a hero came from across the sea, a young man named Theseus, determined to end the monster once and for all, and the king's own daughter fell in love with him and went to the one person who knew the secret of the maze. She went to Daedalus. And Daedalus, who had built the labyrinth to be unsolvable, told her how to beat it, a simple thread, tied at the entrance and unspooled along the way, so that whoever walked in could always find the way back out. With that thread, Theseus went into the dark, killed the thing at the center, and walked back out alive, and then fled the island with the king's daughter. When Minos discovered how it had been done, that his own master craftsman had handed away the secret of the prison he had been paid to make perfect, his fury fell on Daedalus. The cleverest man in the world had outwitted the king one time too many, and Minos decided that Daedalus would never leave Crete again. So Daedalus, the greatest maker in the world, became a prisoner of his own most famous creation's island, and he was not imprisoned alone. With him was his young son Icarus, a boy who had done nothing at all except be the child of a man the king could not forgive. The two of them were shut away, watched and confined, and as the days became months, Daedalus turned that famous mind to the one problem that mattered now, how to get his son off this island and back to freedom. But Minos was no fool, and Crete was no ordinary prison. The king ruled the strongest navy in the world, and his ships watched every harbor and every stretch of coast. There was no slipping away by sea. Any boat that tried would be caught before it cleared the shadow of the island. There was no escape by land, because the island was surrounded by water in every direction. Every ordinary road to freedom was closed and guarded. Daedalus studied the problem the way he studied everything, turning it over and over, and slowly he understood that Minos, for all his power, did not actually control every road off the island. He controlled the land. He controlled the sea. But there was one way left that no king on earth could guard: the sky. Minos could chain the harbors and patrol the coast, but he could not put a wall across the open air. If Daedalus and his son could not walk or sail off the island, then they would have to fly off it, and so the cleverest man in the world set himself the most impossible task of his life. He began to gather feathers. The old stories say he collected them patiently, in secret, over many days, feathers of every size, from the great wide pinions of the largest birds down to the smallest and lightest. He laid them out in careful rows and bound them together, the larger ones threaded and tied, the smaller ones sealed in place with soft warm wax, and slowly, out of all those scattered feathers, the shape of something extraordinary began to appear. Wings. 2 great pairs of them, curved and layered exactly like a real bird's, built to catch the air and hold a human body up against the pull of the earth. When they were finished, Daedalus fitted the smaller pair to the shoulders and arms of his son, and the larger pair to himself, and he taught the boy how to use them, how to beat them, how to glide, how to ride the wind. And for the first time since the island had become their prison, there was a way out. There was just one rule the boy had to follow. Before they flew, Daedalus took his son aside, and he gave him a warning, the kind of warning a father gives when his child's life is about to depend on it. "Fly the middle way," he told him. "Keep to the path between the sea and the sun. If you fly too low," he said, "the spray and the damp of the sea will soak into the feathers and weigh the wings down until they fail. But if you fly too high," and here was the real danger, "the heat of the sun will soften the wax that holds the feathers in place, and the wings will come apart in your hands. So do not get greedy with the height, and do not let the joy of it carry you away. Stay close to me. Follow my path. Keep to the middle of the sky." The old writers tell us that, as Daedalus fitted the last of the wings to his son's small shoulders, his hands were trembling, and his cheeks were wet, and some part of him already sensed what was coming. He was a father about to trust the most fragile thing he had ever built with the most precious thing he had ever loved. He kissed the boy. He told him, one more time, to be careful. And then the 2 of them stepped off the cliff and flew. And flying, it turned out, was glorious. Picture what it must have been for the boy. No human being had ever done this, not once, in all the history of the world. Icarus rose up off the cliff and the air took him, and suddenly the island that had been his whole shrinking prison fell away beneath him, smaller and smaller, until it was just a shape in a great blue sea. The wind was in the feathers. The sun was on his back. Below him the water sparkled all the way to the edge of the world, and the fishermen in their little boats looked up in astonishment and took the 2 of them for gods, because what else could be flying through the open sky? For a boy who had been locked away, watched and confined for so long, it must have felt like the purest freedom anyone had ever known. The whole world suddenly open in every direction, and nothing holding him to the earth at all. And that, in the end, was the danger his father had feared. Because joy like that does not make you cautious. It makes you bold. The higher Icarus flew, the more wonderful it felt, and the more wonderful it felt, the higher he wanted to go. Somewhere up in that brilliant sky, with the wind singing in his wings, the boy forgot every word of the warning. He climbed. He climbed. Up past the height his father had warned him to keep, up where the air grew thin and bright, and the sun burned closer and hotter than he had ever felt it. And for a while, nothing happened, which is the cruel part, because it let him believe that the warning had been an old man's fear, that the rules did not apply to him, that he could go higher still. But high above the sea, the heat was doing exactly what Daedalus had said it would. Slowly, invisibly, the wax that held the feathers of his wings began to soften. A feather loosened and slipped free and spun away on the wind. Then another. Then more. Icarus, lost in the joy of the climb, did not notice at first, and by the time he did, by the time he felt the wings beginning to come apart beneath his hands, it was already too late. He beat them harder, desperate now, but there was less and less of them to catch the air. The feathers were streaming away from him into the bright sky. And then, all at once, the wings simply failed. The thing that had been holding the boy up against the whole weight of the world was gone, and there was nothing left between Icarus and the sea, far, far below, but the long, bright emptiness of the open air. And he fell. The old writers do not linger on it, and neither will we, only to say that the boy who had flown higher than any human being in history now dropped out of that bright sky toward the sea with the last of his feathers scattering above him, calling out for his father. Somewhere below and ahead, Daedalus was still flying the careful middle path, exactly as he had taught his son to do, and at some point he became aware that the boy was no longer beside him. He looked around the empty sky and called the boy's name and got no answer. And then he saw them, feathers, his feathers, the feathers he had gathered and bound and sealed with his own hands, scattered across the surface of the water far below. That was how Daedalus understood what had happened. Not by seeing the fall, but by seeing what was left of his wings drifting on the sea. The cleverest man in the world, the one who could solve any problem and build anything, circled helplessly in the empty air above the place where his son had gone into the water, and there was nothing at all, that his genius could do about it. Daedalus came down at last on the nearest scrap of land, and there, the old stories say, he found his son. He buried Icarus on that lonely island, the brilliant hands that could build anything now doing the one thing no father should ever have to do. And from then on, the place carried the boy's name. The island was called Icaria, and the stretch of sea where he had fallen became the Icarian Sea, so that the water itself would remember a boy who had flown for one glorious morning and then come down. Daedalus put his own wings back on and flew on alone and lived for years afterward and never built anything that mattered to him again. Think about what he had to carry for the rest of his life. He had been the cleverest man in the world. When every ordinary road to freedom was closed, he had done the impossible. He had given his son the sky itself. And his son had died of it, in front of him, wearing wings his own father had made. The escape worked. That is the part we forget. Daedalus got off the island. He just got off it alone, and the price of his son's freedom turned out to be his son. We have turned this story into a warning, and it is easy to see why. Don't fly too high. Don't let pride carry you past the limit set for you. There is truth in that, and the Greeks meant some of it. But when you sit with the older telling, the imprisonment, the desperate cleverness, the father's trembling hands, the feathers on the water, it stops sounding like a lecture about pride and starts sounding like something far more human. Because Icarus was not really destroyed by arrogance. He was a boy who had been locked away, who was finally, suddenly, free, in the most extraordinary way anyone had ever been free, and who loved that freedom so much that he could not bear to keep it small. And his father was not a wise old man delivering a moral. He was a parent who did everything right, who built a miracle and gave a careful warning and flew alongside his child the whole way, and who learned in the worst way there is that you cannot always save the people you love just by being clever enough or by warning them enough. Maybe that is the truest version of the story. Not, don't fly too high, but how much it can cost to give someone the wings to be free, and how little, in the end, even the cleverest of us can do to keep them safe once they are in the sky. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.